Chapter 3, Conducting a Literature Review. In this chapter, we will talk about how to begin your literature review for your topic of interest. At this point, you should have hopefully narrowed down some topic that you might be interested in. And you may not know exactly what it is that you would like to investigate or propose to investigate, but at this point, we should have a discipline, which is your discipline based on your program of study. And within that discipline, maybe some topic areas that you may be interested in investigating. The benefits of conducting a literature review. One of the benefits of conducting a literature review is you may be surprised to find that someone has already answered your research question. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't continue on. We have studies that are called replication studies. So it may be a good starting point for a study that you would like to conduct. We could do what's called a partial replication. And with a partial replication, we could perhaps, let's say there was a study conducted on second graders and looking at a technique to help facilitate their math learning. And then let's say that we think there's some applicability of that same procedure in encouraging students and building up their confidence and efficacy in math. And we think that it could also help seventh graders, and we want to test that. So although we'd be replicating the study, we would be trying it with a new population. So you can alter a piece of that previous study. So don't be upset if you do find that someone has answered your question. It also goes to show that that was a good question that others were interested in as well. But many times we find what we call is a gap in the literature, which is also great because now we're investigating a problem that has not previously been found. The literature review then becomes a little bit more complex because we need to build an argument without maybe having literature that ties in exactly to what it is that we're interested in investigating. So we need to kind of piece together different articles that can build that argument for this new idea. We can also find new ideas for inspiration and perspectives and new approaches. There are two types of sources for new ideas. We have what are called the non-systematic sources, inspiration, serendipity, everyday experiences, and then we have those systematic sources. And a literature review is a very systematic, methodical approach towards developing the topic, and so that's what we're doing now. We can learn about other researchers who conduct work in the same area. One of the benefits of starting out, let's say you find one article that really piques your interest, a great piece of advice would be to go to their reference list at the end of the article and see what sources did they include in their study to substantiate their own hypothesis or research question. And perhaps those references can then give you some information to support your own idea as well. We can also identify controversial issues and gaps in the understanding that have not yet been resolved. In conducting a literature review, we also can figure out how have others handled methodological and design issues similar to our own. So we can look in their method section and see what kind of procedures did they have. Did they have to use special instructions? Did they have to use specialized instruments or assessment tools? What kinds of assessments did they use? You can find the reliability and the validity information for those assessments, and you can make your own judgments about whether or not those would be appropriate for your own study. We can also uncover sources of data that we may not have known existed, right? So we find new information, discover established measurement tools. This is a really key aspect in terms of, let's say we're looking at math fluency. Well, how have others measured math fluency in the literature? So we can find some assessment tools, whether they use computerized assessments or paper and pencil assessments, or some type of verbal assessment where they had to explain and describe their own process. So we can look at what are the different measurement tools, which measurement tools are shown to be, again, reliable and valid, and you can find all of that information in the literature review. Also, you can interpret and make sense of your findings and tie your results to the works of those who've preceded you. So, although we are not conducting the study in this course, if you were to conduct the study, after you run your analyses and you go to the section that's called the discussion section where you're interpreting your results, you can always connect it back to the previous literature to explain why it is you found what you did. And you can say, well, it really ties in well with the previous literature. We would have expected to find this. Or if you wouldn't expect to find it, maybe you need to discuss some limitations of your study and why it didn't connect to the previous literature as you would have thought it would. The benefits, again, of conducting a literature continue here is to bolster your confidence that your topic is one worth studying. So going back to that example where perhaps you found, wow, someone already conducted this study. Don't be discouraged by that. That should be encouraging. Also, on the flip side, though, it's the same thing. If you find a gap in the literature, you say, wow, no one has studied this yet. This is something that is worth investigating because we can contribute to the knowledge base by investigating this further. The more you know about investigations and perspectives related to your topic, the more effectively you can tackle your own research problem. So the more you have a broad understanding of how your particular research topic was studied, the better you can then approach your own research design. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll look at the literature and take a piece from each project and incorporate those and tie them together in a way that makes sense for our own project. So that's one thing as well. We don't need to conduct an exact replication. We can take the aspects from different studies and then tie those together in a way that's meaningful for our own. Okay, so here's the big starting point with locating literature. And here's the one thing that you want to remember always as you are utilizing library searches. Depending on your area, and I know some of you are outside of the School of Education, there are some databases that we typically rely on. ERIC is the main one for the educational literature. PsycInfo is the main one for the psychological literature. There's also PsycArticles. And then SocIndex for, even if it is a psychology or education related field, but investigating aspects of the social interaction. If you are outside of the School of Education, outside of psychology, you may want to speak to your advisor at this point about locating the appropriate search engine. So I can help you investigate it further. Once you know the appropriate search engine, they would be the best resource because I know you all are coming from all sorts of departments all over campus. So once you locate that online database, here's what you need to know. The main thing is that it is what librarians call not forgiving. What that means is that if you enter a search into Google, no matter what you put into that search box, typically you will find something. Google will say, wait, did you mean? And then they'll come up with their own variation of what it is that you entered in the search box. The library databases, on the other hand, are like what I said, librarians call not forgiving. So you will enter some terms that the library search engine does not recognize. It will turn around and say, we have nothing. And that's the not forgiving part. It's not forgiving if you do not use the appropriate keywords. Okay, so step one is identifying the appropriate keywords to investigate your topic so that you'll have a greater success in your search. So here's what you would need to do. I would recommend you start with something like Google Scholar. Google, being a vast search engine, a little bit more forgiving. Scholar, giving you some scholarly articles. Now it will refer you to some journal articles, and it may give you a sense of some of the terms. You may also even just use Google and get a search, and since Google is more forgiving, it'll give you some other search terms. I'll give you an example. I had students who were investigating and looking at behaviors in a gym and looking at, whether or not they were cleaning their gym equipment, and looked at it as a topic of civility. Well, we were looking for search terms, and I'll remember this because it stood out in my mind, that we were looking for search terms, and we found this term called sweaticute. So it's the etiquette of sweating in a gym and cleaning off your equipment. And that is a term that we would have never come up with on our own. It's so unique. But in doing a search online and investigating further, we found these terms, and this happens all the time, where you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense now, in thinking about it. It's something that we were not familiar with, but it gave us a higher likelihood of success when we went back to the search engines. So in the same way, this is a really unique example, but this does apply to any research project. The more that you do broad searches online just to get the terms, you can even look in newspaper articles, popular media for those terms, and sometimes they'll even refer to the actual peer-reviewed article. That happens as well. And then you can go back to the library when you're equipped with some search terms and then enter them into those databases like PsycInfo, ERIC, etc. Another thing that you can do is go directly to the library search and utilize what are called the thesaurus or subject terms. So for example, if you go to PsycInfo and one of the top tabs says thesaurus, if you click on thesaurus and do a search within the PsycInfo thesaurus, it is a little bit more forgiving, and you put in a term and then it gives you all sorts of related keywords and subject terms. Sociindex doesn't call it thesaurus, it calls it subject terms. And if you're using other databases, whether you speak with your advisor or even a librarian, the staff at our library is very helpful, and they'd be more than happy to help you with your search and get you going. And there are librarians that specialize in the different discipline areas, and they're very well versed in all of these little tips. But this should get you started. And remember, again, don't be discouraged if the PsycInfo or ERIC comes back and says that they didn't find that particular term was not found in the database. You just might be using the wrong word or the wrong combination of words. So be persistent, realize that it's not forgiving, and keep pushing forward, and you'll be more successful once you get those keywords. Okay, so locating literature, as I indicated, consult with the reference librarians. They're here on campus. Even if you are a completely online student, there are ways of communicating with them by going to the library website and identifying a reference librarian that can help you in your subject area, and then perhaps scheduling an appointment with them, even if you're not on campus, to help get you started would be a great resource, and you should really take advantage of all the information and help that they can provide you with. Surf the internet. Remember, you can surf the internet as a starting point, but we still want, at the end of the day, some peer-reviewed articles. Also, as you're searching in the databases, PsycInfo, ERIC, etc., on the left-hand side, there are ways to narrow your search. You do want to select peer-reviewed articles. So click that box to make sure you're coming up with the peer-reviewed articles that are required for this assignment. Also, examine citations and reference lists from published work. Also, as I mentioned earlier, once you find a good article, or even, a textbook chapter, and at the end or at the back of the book or at the end at the reference list of an article, you will find that complete list of references, and that is a great resource for finding future articles. Planning a literature search. So you want to write down the problem, map it out, draw it out on paper, some like different types of software, and graphing out the problem. Write each subproblem, break it down into its parts. Make sure that each research question or hypothesis is what we call parsimonious. Keep it as simple as possible. Identify those important words and phrases for the discipline and for your topic area. Again, utilizing those, PsycInfo thesaurus or whatever subject terms or if the source is relevant for your discipline. Translate these words and phrases into specific topics, which is your research agenda. Seek out resources related to your research agenda, and read, right? You want to read and know as much about your topic area as you can. Again, I do encourage you to read other popular sources such as news articles and magazine articles, because they give you an understanding of the relevance of it to the masses, and then you take that relevance and then go back and dig deeper into the peer-reviewed articles. So again, not something that we want to necessarily use to substantiate our research question, but it does give us a starting point to investigate further. Use your library time efficiently. Set up your own database or spreadsheet in advance. Consider a bibliographic software. EndNote is one such example. Go to the library armed with data gathering tools, and I know a lot of you are not physically going to the library, but even go to the library, online, utilizing those resources that you have at the USD library webpage. Identify the materials you want to read and then determine if they are available in your library. Remember, if they are not available in our library, you can use what is called interlibrary loan. And we have connections with other libraries, and our librarians are very helpful in locating copies of materials that are not owned by our own library. And what you need to know with interlibrary loan, if we do not have that on campus or in our databases online, is that you want to plan ahead. So this is not something you want to leave till last minute. Sometimes interlibrary loan may take 2 days. Sometimes it may take several weeks. So if it's an article that you found and then the USD library does not have it, be sure to order it as soon as possible to make sure that you'll have it in time for your assignment. Develop and implement a plan to find sources you've identified, including those not immediately available, as I indicated with interlibrary loan. Search in the library, hold or recall books that are checked out. If you are able to come to campus, that's ideal. But at this point, there are so many ebooks available that you may find ebooks that may be helpful to you. Interlibrary loan, as we discussed. Use an online document delivery service if that's appropriate for you. Order your own copies of books. So I know as I was going through my dissertation, there were lots of books that I said, well, I really want a copy of this book. So if you feel that way, go ahead and order copies of your own books. You can write in them and make them your own. Read and take careful notes. When we're looking through research articles, we want to take careful notes of who are the participants in the study, making sure they align with who the participants are in our study. What is the setting in which this research was conducted? Is that setting similar in any way to the setting in which we would propose to conduct our study? Where geographically are these individuals? So if we're talking about a research study conducted in Canada and applying it to students in the United States, we'd say that's pretty comparable. Perhaps we can identify numerous other countries abroad that maybe the way in which they have their educational practices or parenting styles or whatever it is that we're interested in may not directly apply back to how it's done in the United States. So we need to take this all into consideration as we're investigating whether or not it's an appropriate source. So keep track of those things so you don't get too far and too dependent on an article to support your hypothesis that may not be appropriate. Determine for yourself whether the conclusions are justified based on the data. This is so important, and the more that you understand research methodology, the more that you understand statistics, the more that you can come up with your own conclusions. The other day I was reading a research article. It was an amazing research article, but they had a sample size of 31. And as a statistician, we know that that is a very small sample size. Then they were comparing two groups. One had 15 and one had 16. So really the subgroups were really, sample sizes of 15 and 16, and they were using it to make these conclusions about, how school psychologists should, diagnose students. And so this was a published research article. It was a good food for thought article, something to think about. But at the same time, we have to be very careful about the conclusions that were made based on these teeny tiny sample sizes. And they did mention in their limitations that they had small sample sizes and that the study should be replicated with larger sample sizes. So they did acknowledge it. But we, as consumers of that research, need to be very careful about the conclusions that we draw and the ways in which we generalize those findings to other settings when they have such small sample sizes. This is just one example, but we also need to be able to interpret their statistics, be able to evaluate whether or not they have sound methodology. All of these things are aspects that we want to also evaluate on our own. All right, evaluate, organize, and synthesize. You want to synthesize what you've learned, identify common themes. This is when you have this pile of research articles on your desk or, electronically organized on your computer. And then we put together our notes from all of them and identify some common themes. And then we show how approaches to the topic have changed over time. Maybe there's been an evolution in how we've studied this topic. Like, for example, learning, right? From behaviorist approaches and social behaviorism, cognitivism, and we can see how it's evolved over time. The same is true in other disciplines as well. We can compare and contrast different theoretical positions, for example, in intelligence, right? We have Sternberg's triactive theory of intelligence, we have Gardner's theories of intelligence, we have, the G-factor approach of intelligence. We have all of these different ways in which we can think about this one concept of intelligence. So there may be a situation where we need to compare and contrast theoretical positions. Describe general trends. We can talk about whether it be general trends in methodology, general trends in the way in which this problem has been approached. Again, this is going to look different for each individual project. And then identify any discrepant or contradictory findings. So if the studies have not been able to replicate, for example, they haven't been able to support or confirm what has previously been found. Let's try to figure out why. And what were the explanations that the authors gave, and what other explanations could we come up with to explain those discrepant findings? All right, we want to get the proper psychological orientation. Know what you want to do, right? So be focused, have a good plan of attack on how you're going to piece together all of this information. Develop this organized plan or outline, which I'm having you do for that first assignment. As you can see, emphasize relatedness, how the literature is related to the problem, and use logical transitions. This is so key to writing an effective introduction. You want to have great topic sentences to start your paragraphs and great segue sentences to segue into the next idea. What you do not want to do is just report, Article 1 said this, Article 2 said this, Article 3 said this, Article 4 said this. That is typically not how a good introduction is written. There is typically a lot of support from different articles on each topic within each paragraph, and you'll see multiple different citations. So it's not just a summary of articles, but rather you're developing an argument by piecing together the different aspects of this article, these articles that are relevant to your own project. So use logical transitions. That's really important to have a cohesive narrative. And finally, use appropriate paraphrases and citations. Do not overquote. So a lot of times, sometimes I'll see the use of quotes that is taking away from the writing style of the individual student. So you want to make sure that you're only using quotes when it's absolutely necessary. You are always citing, right? So if that idea comes from an article, from a book, you need to cite that source. But paraphrase, put it in your own words as much as possible. Be very careful about plagiarism. Credit people's ideas that you're using. Use direct quotations, again, only when necessary. You don't want a paper full of all of these quotations. You want to try to put it in your own words and piece it together as best you can while giving credit to each individual concept or idea and from where you found that. Summarize what you've said, plan to revise, and ask others for advice and feedback, including me, the professor. So I hope this gives you a great springboard for starting your own literature reviews. Do not hesitate to let me know if you have any questions along the way. I'm here to help you. And also take advantage of all the wonderful resources we have in our library. We have a really great staff, really helpful, really knowledgeable, and they're happy to help you as well. All right, good luck. Wish you all the best on your literature reviews.